everyone. So my name is Chi. I'm a senior product designer from Acadarina, and I'm based from the Philippines, so in Asia. What we're building now in our startup is essentially we're doing our best to create better experiences for student gamers, for collegiate gaming and esports. So right now we're not really in Web3 at the moment. We're still kind of Web 2 by the definition of the internet, but so far we have been offering. I don't know if you guys know that play to earn games like Axie Infinity is pretty popular in the Philippines or like in that area. So we've been offering scholarships for students, and I guess since the topic that we're gonna be talking about is onboarding, I also found out how we onboard new scholars into our scholarship for Axie Infinity, and safe to say there would be better ways to do it. Right now it's very tedious. It's so many steps and it very manual as well. So yeah, I guess that's something I'm bringing to mind as we're going to be talking about user onboarding, specifically for Web3, because other than just getting to making sure that the person that you're talking to is legit and is an actual student, there's that additional layer. There's also the other layer of thinking that you also have to onboard them into what Web3 is, what Play to Earn is, what Axie is, what Ronin is, for example, like the blockchain, the chain in particular, and how they can get their SLP, their tokens out, and then use that for example, for funding their tuition or for buying their peripherals for school. So yeah, there's
so gaming is a very interesting area for Web3 because the first run for individuals coming into the ecosystem in large droves was kind of like that CryptoKitties era. And then once again, we see NFTs and gaming kind of powering some of that user onboarding flows. Being in the ecosystem for a while, we've talked about UX for onboarding being horrible, but when you see some use cases like gaming take off, all of a sudden people know how to use MetaMask when we thought they wouldn't. So it's really interesting to see, do the use cases bring people into the ecosystem, even though the UX we think is horrible? Or are there other ways we can do a better job of onboarding users? Hester, you've done a lot of on-the-ground research, et cetera, related to different ecosystems and how they kind of look at crypto as a whole. Maybe you can provide some insights as a...
Good question. Okay, let me think. Yeah, so maybe to start off, guys, I'm Hester. I work for Status, and in terms of onboarding, what I like about what we're building, actually, Akil as well, is a Web3 Discord. And when I think about onboarding, I don't necessarily think about onboarding onto Web3, but onboarding onto products that happen to use the things that we call Web3. One of the ways Status at least does that is onboard people onto a communication tool. And then the fact that in the background, maybe you use an Ethereum address and you create that address whenever you create an account to start using the application, doesn't necessarily have to be the main objective. You don't have to be bothered with that. You're just starting to use a messenger because your friends are using that messenger. So that's kind of my perspective on onboarding. And on field research. So I work at Status as a researcher and have done some field research where, so ironically, the other side of Web3 becomes more apparent. I did field research, especially in Venezuela, in Colombia, some remote research in Nigeria. And their onboarding to Web3 actually does mean onboarding into stable coins. Not all the other functionality that you could use Web3 for, but getting a stable currency. And that's the onboarding, not because you're interested in onboarding, but because you want to make sure that when you go buy bread, that you know it's going to cost the same the next day as that you're checking the prices now. So yeah, okay. So I'll pause.
Before you introduce yourself, Sam, I'm kind of curious, do you guys, because you do have the access to analytics on ethereum.org, so when these trends that do come into play, do you see a lot more uptake as far as people searching for certain terminologies or certain things are related to Web3, as far as what was the consequence of the NFT craze on ethereum.org, et cetera?
Traffic exploded is the short gist. I mean, for sure, like, it's always fun and fascinating to watch search volume, for instance, across different terms. And you're absolutely right. Like, the use cases do drive user onboarding in a big way. Like, with NFTs exploding the past year, like, the NFT page on Ethereum.org became more popular than the homepage of Ethereum for, like, the first time ever. Yeah. And, you know, we can see through, you know, search insights, people searching Web3 as that term takes off versus just like cryptocurrency or blockchain. So we try to react to that in some ways, but yeah, sometimes it's more just like observing of like, oh, the people coming are different. How should we like treat them differently? It does bring a lot of those open questions.
Yeah, so I think we've talked about this in different contexts, like the Learn model for Ethereum.org. Getting into the ecosystem, unfortunately, I didn't have the resources to use the new version of the Ethereum.org. Back then, it was just like a very like rudimentary website, but people at that time had to go through a lot of like Medium articles, do a lot of like deep research to figure out what was really going on. I think you guys have done a really good job of compiling some of that information, or at least linking out to it. What has that process been like as far as like making sure that you guys have some sort of narrative a person can follow to get onboarded into the ecosystem, and what does that take for them, essentially?
Yeah, still a work in progress,
Yep.
I guess is the short gist. And I'll just say, like, hey, everybody, I'm Sam. I lead a small web team at the Ethereum Foundation. We work on pretty much exclusively Ethereum.org. Great to be talking in front of a bunch of real live humans again. This is great. But
Are they real? Are they real?
what is real? Let's get into it. So I guess context, I've been working on this for about 2.5 years now. And yeah, like when I joined, there was not a single person dedicated to Ethereum.org. It was open source website from the start, which is awesome, but it was like 4 people's part-time project, no one's full-time focus. And as a result, yeah, it was just like 5 pages on welcome to Ethereum, read the white paper, build a smart contract, and like go off on your own, like go figure it out, which is a terrifying prospect for many reasons. I think the approach we took early on was just like, there's just so much low-hanging fruit of just like covering all these different topics using search volume, for instance, of like, okay, people are searching about Ethereum wallets and how to buy ETH, and you can kind of piece together intuitively certain pathways. I mean, we all use Ethereum, right? We all kind of know what are the basic things you need to do to get up and running. But I feel like we are still a pretty long way from like constructing those useful pathways of learning. Like it's still kind of a bunch of scattered resources of like, okay, you need to find an Ethereum wallet. You go down this hole. Okay, you need to buy ETH. You go down this hole. I think what we'll be working on and would love input from this great group of designers is like, yeah, what are the courses or just like the chapters of someone's journey to Ethereum, and like how do you piece all those concepts together, right? Because we're still far ways from that.
Do any of you guys have any context to, or even like coming from the gaming context, of what areas people kind of naturally gravitate towards or understand intrinsically related to Web3 versus something that is very different from a mental model shift, and they have to do a lot of like thinking about what Web3 is in that context, or there's certain intrinsic things as far as like maybe like data ownership, etc., that really just clicks with them and they're like, okay, this is Web3, this is why I'm going to be using some of this technology?
I think it really depends, yeah, like on where the person is coming from, and that's what's so challenging about trying to build a product for like all Ethereum users, right? Like we come at it from so many different angles. Like for me, I worked in finance for a bit beforehand, and like for me, it was pretty intuitive, and I think for a lot of people coming into the DeFi landscape of like, okay, there's a concept of an account, and I have a balance, and I can exchange money and like different assets with people. So like, I think DeFi is like a pretty simple bridge from the traditional world of finance, but I don't know, I'd be curious to hear like your take on like gaming in Ethereum. Like there might be completely different paradigms of like, you know, who am I? Like, what is my account? How do I track my state? How do I connect with different applications across this single login? I feel like, yeah, different use cases, different applications, there might be like a very different mental model for people.
Makes sense. And if anyone has other inputs and they want to tap us out, you're more than welcome to. That's the whole process. Yeah, so maybe you want to come in here as well. But I would be, yeah, like sit up there. But I would be curious about like from an aspect of like Axie Infinity, etc. Do people go beyond just that use case of play to earn? Are they looking to learn a little bit more once they do earn tokens or whatever it may be? Have you seen any signals around that?
For us specifically, the students who come in our scholarship really do go in because they want to help their parents pay for the tuition. Because yeah, usually that's the case that I see, and like for most part, like for the students that I've interviewed with as well, once they get to a certain point that they're good enough, because like it takes certain skill to like reach a certain level of like MMR or something, and then they eventually like graduate. They also look for graduate, meaning they can go out of the scholarship already or something, because some of them actually wanna eventually earn enough to be able to have their own Axie team. So I don't know if people here aren't familiar with how the scholarship works for Axie, but just to like say it, it's like instead of you buying the NFT Axies for yourself, someone else buys it and then you just let them borrow it. So the students are essentially borrowing the thing. They don't own it, but then they use it because the person who bought it bought a lot of NFTs, and then they're just making people do it, and then they earn a bit. They earn a bit from that. And actually what we also do is like, we also provide students more of the cut, instead of like, there are other guilds in the Philippines who would have like a larger cut from like what they earn when they play the game. So what we do is like, we just really give it back to the students. So far, what I've seen is really that it's either for tuition or for buying a new PC, because a lot of us are still having online classes. We're not yet face-to-face, and even that's already like pretty hard, or like pretty weird in a sense for the state of education on our end. But yeah, like mostly those are the things that I've seen. Either they want to get further into the game, or it's really just for their own benefit. So,
makes sense.
Yeah.
Introduce yourself and.
Hi guys, I'm Ali. I'm visiting from London. We are also working on developing blockchain games, and we focus on developing health data-based games. And the kind of genesis point for that was I originally come from Pakistan, and it's 220 million people. Not a lot of people speak English, but the move to earn movement has been really interesting. Now the challenge is that in terms of on-ramping or off-ramping from such a population where English is not so commonly done, transaction fees are not really part of the financial ecosystem per se, because a lot of it is done through mobile payments or micropayments, and those kind of transactions are much more common. People don't really have access to Visa or MasterCard type credit cards, so KYC is not done in the same way. And just the denominations are like, the purchasing power parity is very different. So like what we think of like, oh, Polygon is amazing for like, the transaction fees are so little, but then the transaction fees in Pakistani currencies are, oh my God, this is like somebody's lunch money for like a day. And so we are having to rethink some of those on-ramping, off-ramping user journeys, because one of the big things is nobody gives a fuck about on-ramping into Web3, because nobody wants to come into Web3. They're just trying to get shit done in their life, earn money, or like buy a new house, or like buy a fancy car, or like they want to do that. Like nobody has time to use a beautifully written user doc. Nobody wants to Google like, what is an NFT? They want to learn like, how can I become a millionaire? Like that's kind of like what they are trying to do. And so for us, like abstracting away all those layers and how can we compress everything down to like one link is the obsession, because that just does not exist. And so right now, a couple of weeks ago, we were trying to do Gitcoin grants, and the experience was terribly awful. Just like, we had to explain to people on the phone, like, go here, set up a MetaMask, now go to chain list, like add the Polygon chain. Oh, I'm sorry, you don't go to the KYC route because now then you'll be 48 hours in KYC hell. We will try to send you the token, then you can like, that way you can send it. It was just all sorts of bad. And we are like 10 years into this thing and it's still the kind of like dial-up modem sounds. And so like my friends were like, can't I just send you on Revolut? Like, can you send me a one link? And that's the thing, people's expectations when dial-up came around, when Web 1 came around, everybody was together in that user experience. Right now, people have a very polished, elevated expectation of what user experience feels like. And Web 3, that's why the battle is so hard. Like even my mother, like she crushes Candy Crush all the time. But like, she's like, I don't know why you want me to do this. Like, so yeah, that's kind of like some of the user pain points that we are seeing.
So I think you touched on one key point was that even the question of like how do we onboard users on the Web3 is a privileged question to ask in the first place because people have to worry about their lives. They're not really worrying about the technology or what we're working on in the first place. So how do you think like ecosystems like Pakistan, I think India has a little bit more adoption or other countries like in MENA, et cetera. How do we get more people excited or interested in some of this stuff, or what use cases can be developed for those individuals so we're not marginalizing those communities once again in this new financial system that's kind of being created?
I think one of the important things to actually realize, which is a bit humbling, is that the mobile and financial tech stack in Western economies is quite primitive. So in Pakistan, mobile payments have been around for, I don't know, 15 years now. The kind of things that has enabled in the economy are just massively simpler. So if I want to send you 5,000 rupees right now, I don't need anything other than your phone number, and then you can just go to any corner shop and get that from right there. And it's very effortless. There's no transaction fees. There's no KYC that needs to be done. It's just a code that you can share with the shop. And those things are very intuitive to people. And so realizing that whole swaths of billions of people just think differently of the financial stack is important to learn. And then also realizing that all those people just speak, like the translation point was so valuable because unlike India, English is not very common in Pakistan. And so for us, it's important to know, okay, for our demographic, like translating everything from the get-go is really important. And finally, the adoption actually is much more in non-Western economies for crypto. Yeah. Because traditionally, they haven't been able to access the kinds of like Visa, MasterCard, Amazon hasn't really played there. So they have already got the kind of things we call here like what TransferWise does is already called like Hundi. And there are all these systems that just work. Like I was like, oh man, sorry, TransferWise is asking this fee. My friend says that there's a Tornado Cash equivalent for crypto in Pakistan where you just send to this like Ethereum address and then it gets it to your mobile payment. I was like, great. That's how we should be thinking of onboarding, offboarding.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Hester, do you find that to be true in like the South America, Central America regions as well? Or you kind of touched about it being stable coins, et cetera. Do you see adoption being a little bit more elevated there compared to other areas?
So I can speak to my experience, which is like 2 years dated. So things might have definitely changed. But I did definitely notice the kind of the swiftness of the current payment systems. That really does pose the question, like, why would you even change that? Like, why would you even bother trying to learn something else if you can just give your phone number? So you'd almost get into starting to not onboard but convince people, which is where we get if we continue to think about let's onboard people, let's create adoption. Rather than, and I'm going to quote someone else here that gave a presentation 2 weeks ago, but posing the what problem are we solving rather than how can we onboard people and how can we create adoption. Because in some of those cases, really we see a need and we see that things might be better in our perspective, but not necessarily the case. So then, yeah, why? Yeah, it's almost like why bother with focusing on adoption there?
Makes sense. So I'm going to tap in Georgia if she's still around.
Just got in.
Sorry?
She just got in.
Okay, perfect timing. Yeah, so maybe you can start with the right side. I think we're going to switch over to user research and kind of talk about how that kind of bridges in as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, so leading in from some of the onboarding stuff into user research, what type of work has been done around onboarding when it comes to user research, any studies, et cetera, that you guys have been exposed to? And then how do we get more of that work being done in the ecosystem as a whole? Like you mentioned, someone kind of facilitating you to do like a whole ecosystem type study, et cetera. What can be done for us to kind of help facilitate some of that work as well?
Onboarding, have you got a point you want to make about onboarding? Because it might be your... Okay. So I think the studies I've done around onboarding have been like, what are the user experience issues in the onboarding process?
Yeah.
Like, and trying to find ways to optimize those. So what are the, the things that can be improved slightly? But it all comes down to the question still of why would somebody onboard? So I think it's understanding, referring back to what I spoke about in my talk, which is the job to be done. And the reason that people enter Web3 is normally they come from a centralized exchange. That's the first place that they've been, and then they have a reason to download a self-custody wallet or do something now in the decentralized space for the first time. And their onboarding is that task. I have this thing that I want to do, and it's usually like buy this meme coin, see these NFTs, do something else, stake my coins. I've realized that I want to make this gap, this jump. And naturally, I think that's a really good growth. If we're talking about like we want to expand the audience for Web3, ignoring the question of whether we should and why they should, those are the people who would naturally come into the space because they've already overcome the initial why should I care about crypto in the first place, right? They've taken the step to actually put some money on Coinbase or try the Coinbase Earn program or something like that. So then they're the perfect audience to think about building for and think about what are the problems that they have. Because you're not, like when I talk to projects who want to just build, I say, who are your users? And they say, everybody. And that's not possible. You can't build for everybody. And I think apart from distinct use cases that exist, in certain like geopolitical contexts or economic contexts where there's like a push factor to go into this space. Right? I want my government is not allowing me access to the services that I want to have. I'll move here. Hyperinflation, I'll move there. So without that, it's very difficult to find a good enough reason to convince somebody to move in if they haven't already made the jump themselves logically or in their own thought process that they actually want to be part of this. But then once they're sat on a centralized exchange, they're quite happy there. They trust them. I'm really sorry to say that like users really, really, really trust those things. And like it's time and market. They're big, too big to fail. It's a fallacy, right? Because we've heard already. It's the same idea that Google. We all trust Google with practically everything that we do, right? The day that it goes down and no one can do anything, the whole world will crumble. Because no one will get any work done. They won't be able to travel anywhere. There's lots of real problems with it, but we don't see that until it happens, and that's the same for these centralized exchanges. So, what are the things that excite people? That initially it is the research that I've conducted is around you might be disappointed to hear this, but is about how can I get rich, and we've already spoken about this. People want to. They want to make money, and they see it firstly as that opportunity. And then they learn about the technology behind the things that they buy, and then they get excited about this technology and what it could do for them. I'll stop here if anyone wants to jump in.
So I had a question for Sam, because I think you raised something about wanting to do some sort of open source research, etc. So like Georgia was mentioning, you can't build something for everybody. How do you guys kind of approach that from eat.org, and then what kind of research do you guys want to kind of facilitate moving forward, essentially?
I don't know if this one's on. Can you guys hear me?
No.
Thank you, miss. I mean, it is a big question. It's like, yeah, because is Ethereum for everyone, right? Like, we hope so one day. But you got to start somewhere, and you got to probably find, yeah, like, why are people using it? Like Georgia mentioned, of like, hey, does your country have 40% inflation every year? Like, okay, maybe stable coins are like a killer fucking use case for you, and you're super excited about it. So I guess in short, the opportunity or the project initiative we're kind of noodling on is, yeah, like, given we are an open source community of a bunch of Ethereum projects, like, how can we kind of crowdsource some sort of user persona hub or user persona research? Like, how can we avoid every single project, every single startup having to, like, advocate for user research within their own internal organization of like, hey, this is why you should pay me to like spend a week figuring out who the heck our users are. Is there a way that we could somehow like share those resources, right? Like WAGME, right? Like we are competing in some ways, but for the most part, we can find collaborative ways of working together. And it's like, as Ethereum.org, you know, we see ourselves as somewhat of like a public good and somewhat like in a unique position to be able to facilitate this of like, we're not trying to sell any product outside of Ethereum itself. So like, can we kind of kickstart a community who, you know, shares user interviews or just like shares personas? I don't know how we could, but
Perfect
would love
segue.
to jam on how we might.
Don't you guys have something? I know I said no shilling, but I think you guys have created something with Sasha and a few other individuals here that you guys might want to share.
Yeah, there are a few user researchers who've been around in the space for a while. There's a few of us here in the room. And one of the big problems for user researchers or anyone trying to do your own UX testing is getting people to do it, right? And the reality is if you had somebody stood outside your office door who's a perfect profile of user for the thing that you're designing, you'd be doing user testing all the time. And recruiting for users is a real problem in any industry. We decided to try and make it easier for researchers in the space to get access to users. So we set up a user testing panel for Web3 native users called, you can go to visit it at web3ux.org. And we have a panel of about 180 people now, I think it is, something like that. And we're currently in the process of working out what is the onboarding process for external researchers, right? The point is that it's a pool of users that everybody can tap into. They get paid for their time. It's all handled by this platform. So we're currently in the process of defining that process. But I think wider than just that also is I have a personal interest in creating a community of people interested in user research, and I think that there's funding out there with enough weight behind the topic of interest. We should be doing research as a public good, and I end up work for clients, and I just end up doing the same research for everybody all the time. Yeah. It's proprietary. They don't want to share it with anybody else. I'm not allowed to talk about it. But it's so valuable that it if we could create one thing, even just state of Web3 users, what are their pains, what are their jobs to be done, or Ethereum specifically, or anything like that, and then provide this, with here's all the opportunities. It could be. Any product team could look at it and go, let's solve for that problem. Let's solve for that problem.
For sure. I think Status has released some publicly, but I feel like more organizations should be kind of leaning into that direction as far as we've done this research. It can benefit Ethereum.org. It can benefit anyone else kind of coming into the ecosystem. Let's give it out. And I don't know if there's any other projects you've seen that are leaning into that and that we could kind of tap into moving forward as well.
Yeah, I think there's partly the making reports public.
Yeah.
There's also a lot of context that's required there. A lot of research is tuned to a particular product.
Yeah.
So getting that research to be generalizable and usable to other projects, that might be a step. And the other step is initiating, which I guess what Ethereum.org is intending to do, from what you're describing, initiating research that benefits the ecosystem as a whole, which leads to different broader user research questions and different reporting. So I think it needs to come a little bit from both angles,
Yeah.
that individual projects or organizations start publishing publicly, this is what we found, so it doesn't have to be repeated, but then also that overarching research, so that some of the bigger questions that don't immediately benefit a individual project can still be answered, because there's people to do it, and there's people to talk to as well, which what we have with the panel.
Makes sense. Is there any context from like the Pakistan region, et cetera, that you think could be necessary for these individuals who want to start doing research to kind of make sure that they're tapping into all the different demographics, et cetera, and so forth?
I think the challenge in user research communities is user research as a discipline is not studied that much. Like, user research is not that diverse right now. Like, the representation is still uneven. And so a lot of times the lived experience of a lot of people or user researchers doesn't immediately go like, oh, that thing we do so commonly in that country is a bit uncommon. And so trying to really pull that, how do people in, I don't know, Egypt enjoy Netflix? And kind of remembering that there are people in all those geographies that are unrepresented, unknown voices who are just not in this room, and how can we pull them out? And remembering that the biggest thing is the language barrier it needs to be overcome, and so maybe the user researchers on the ground in those communities who can help do the IRL research, how do we tap into that? And like right now, like there's a live situation in Ukraine, right? Like what ideas should that be sparking for us that like, okay, that kind of thing will happen in other places at some point in time. What is the resilience and robustness and the user experience for that, right? Like if you're trying to get your family out of that region, you don't want to be doing transaction fees or like thinking about the 3 transactions you do in MetaMask. Like how can we make our world more robust and resilient as well, I think is important to remember, because for a lot of people in these regions, life is so much more harder. And so like this cognitive burden that we add, I mean, it's amazing to be able to see in your MetaMask wallet, okay, this is signing that transaction, but like, if you just don't even know like how to find trusted entities in the system, like how do you then know what is up or what is down? I think that's important to remember.
For sure. I just want to make sure that other individuals who might have some context to share do get an opportunity. Sam's been up there hogging the stage for quite a while, so I don't know if someone wants to tap him out.
Someone save me, quick.
But yeah, other than that, I think, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, come on up.
Yes. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you, Akil.
Appreciate it.
Woo.
Please introduce yourself and then give us a little bit of context, perhaps on user research, and then we're going to move into decentralization and the need for it as well.
Cool. Hi, everybody. My name is Thibaut. I'm a designer. I'm coming from the Web2 space. I've been in that space for like 15 years, and I'm slowly moving into the Web3 space. And the thing I wanted to say about user research is, first of all, it is part of a process, and I think it was Sasha who touched upon it, where she was saying like we as designers, you're always at the end of the chain, right? Where you're like, you have to just put basically like lipstick on a pig, and this is not going to be good for the product in general. The other part is like there are two ways that you can do user research. I mean, from my perspective, again, one is you want to test how usable your product is, right? And that's kind of what we're talking about here. Is like, okay, you have a task, you have a job to be done. This is like go do, create your MetaMask account and do all the shebang that goes with it, and see what the success rate is about it. There's another way, which is also interesting, especially in that space, is how valuable is your product? How valuable is your protocol for end users? And that's something that was really interesting from what you were saying, is like, sometimes many times you go onto the field and you realize that people don't have time for your product, because we're all like always on our phones. There's like so much to be done, especially in the financial space. There's so much happening. So the question is, when you do this kind of research, is like, why would people make the efforts, cognitive, financially, to switch to my application, and how relevant is my application, my protocol, or whatever you're building, because it needs to be so relevant for people to like switch and move to that. And I think, and I close on that, I really encourage you to go on the Internet Time Machine and look at what Facebook looked like in 2007. It was horrible. Like it was literally a piece of, but it was so successful because it was really relevant. So the UX is these two things, where it is like how usable it is, sure, but also how relevant is it. And I think Facebook killed it because they were super relevant. They were the first one to do that. And God, I hate Facebook, but I have to give it to them. Like, they were super relevant in 2007. This is when I show my age. But and this is also the question we might be asking, where, especially as designers, we're asking for budget to do user research. It's like, it's not about how usable it is, also how relevant it is.
100% agree, and I'd love to build off your point, which is around relevance. It's like a fact of like sad truth, home truth, that like about 90% of the things being built in Web3 are irrelevant. They don't solve any problem for anybody. They are clones of other projects. There's very little thought that's gone into those things. It's a bit like speaking at an event for startups, and the reality is that 9 out of 10 startups fail, right? And I've met projects and teams that were, received so much money at the start, and they were building for 2 years. And I asked them, well, who's the user? What's the use case? And they hadn't come to one yet. And that's shocking. And I think it's really demoralizing for designers working in the space to be working on projects like that. And if that's you, I'm sorry for you. But what I would say is, like, maybe I'll just be controversial. Leave. Go and find where the value is. Like, actually go and try and solve a problem for something that is actually valuable. Because those are the only products that are going to last longer term. And we should be putting our attention there, like trying to solve problems for people, existing problems for humans, rather than creating new problems for them.
So I want to add a little bit more into why decentralization matters and how that kind of impacts all of this conversation in the first place. So I'll open up Hester's seat. Thank you, Hester, for giving up your lunch and being up there as well. So if anyone has a strong input, I don't know where Liggy is. Maybe someone can tap in Liggy from downstairs. Yeah, I appreciate it. I think...
He's on the door.
Yeah, so he's a big decentralization and distributed network type individual, but like from my perspective, at least, that's something that I am passionate about. Is we're building all these technologies, but most of the focus on decentralization is kind of being pushed to the back. So as I mentioned, like how many people are actually running nodes, how many people actually want to run a light client, etc. Do they even understand what's happening and what's the value in all of that? And that I kind of share that question to you guys. Like, does it matter to the individual in Pakistan or Egypt that decentralization is a thing and it has some benefit to them at the end of the day, or it's just too much of a roadmap for them to even get to that point at this juncture?
I mean, the thing is that what we are building, there's nothing new under the sun, right? Like, what has been the adoption of the Tor client, or how many people use DuckDuckGo,
yeah,
right? Like, how many people buy their things not on Amazon? And I think people generally do not care about a thing. Like, I think, and that was earlier, right? Like, the cost of making beef versus, I don't know, insect protein. We are educated on that, but how many of us have become ethical vegans? Like, not many. The answer is not usually education or knowing. And the answer usually is that the job's to be done, honestly. But usually in the engineer's mindset, they can figure out a way that the job can be done. But that's not enough. Yeah, there's jobs to be done, and there's a way the job can be done. But usually it's not the way that the job will be done. And in Pakistan and Egypt, like, there's this whole concept of jugaad, which is like, you know, the hack, which is that you can figure out that if the system is frictionful, you'll find a way and you'll get the solution done, because life is so hard generally. People just have gotten used to figuring out the hack. So if decentralization is going to cost the end user more, you bet centralized nodes will emerge in Pakistan and Egypt. The people are nifty, the people are crafty. And so unless there is actually a valid, valuable thing you can code into the system that decentralized will make this faster, efficient, it will make you rich, it will make you beautiful. Like,
so that's the beautiful thing about blockchain and the Web3 technologies, is you can build on those economic incentives, et cetera, into the system that kind of benefit and advocate for that decentralization in the first place. So like staking is a part of it, but obviously there's certain barriers for you to even participate in that system in the first place. So the rich end up getting richer. But if there were opportunities for you to kind of like play to earn, et cetera, then you're saying it makes a little bit more sense.
And freedom of speech, honestly, right? Like,
yeah.
The thing is, in these geographies, freedom of speech is so massive. We saw the suppression through various political regimes of that, and there were active people doing underground, like, freedom of speech things. And so decentralization in these geographies actually matters, because not of freedom of like financial freedoms, but actually because of freedom of speech and being able to like self-organize. Because in those geographies, Facebook gets shut down, YouTube gets shut down centrally. Like if there is something like, especially when those Prophet Muhammad cartoon things were happening, we really saw how much of the media was fragile, because it could be taken away like that. And so in those spaces, that freedom of access to information and speech matters a lot, and in that case, decentralization matters.
That's a very good point. Is like there is already that use case of, hey, censorship resistance, et cetera,
Yeah.
is a use case that we have, and how do you frame it in a way where they're actually willing to run the nodes and the technology behind it to actually facilitate some of that as well?
Absolutely. Because, of course, certain kind of movies or TV shows or dramas still cannot be made, and they will be censored by the governments. And so kind of like there are creatives there who are tech savvy enough who will buy into the program if there is something in them that they believe in the vision. And maybe that's the other point. The vision that people believe in varies from place to place. The dream that we all have varies from place to place.
So, Georgia, touching on your point about like the jobs to be done, et cetera, being a devil's advocate, if we didn't have the technologists or these individuals coming up with these ideas that probably don't have use cases currently, but lead to technology that open up these other use cases later in the future, but they're thinking about it from a very fragmented perspective that might not be useful for you today, but maybe 10 years down the line, et cetera. Should that work not be facilitated or kind of be optimized for as well?
Yeah, you're right. It should be.
Yeah.
But you're sort of building for the unknown. I think that doesn't mean that a group of people who have uncovered the unknown shouldn't be working on that problem at the same time. Right? I think that's the better group to be in than the ones building without a purpose, personally. I think the example that you gave of censorship resistance is a really, really compelling one. I currently do not run any nodes, but what I used to run a node for, this is showing my age now, a decentralized Twitter called Twister that ran on the Bitcoin network, and it was to prevent Twitter being shut down from by governments there, and that was the thing that got me into Web3. I was like, wow, this is that is so important. If I can do something in my home which helps this group of people in another country be able to communicate with one another when otherwise they can't, isn't that really valuable? And that's obviously an unexpected use of Bitcoin at the time, right? And that was before Ethereum smart contracts, where you could do anything on Ethereum. So yeah, I mean, I guess all kinds of amazing uses come out of technologies, and we should be funding that work too. But why don't we but that's not shouldn't be at the expense of going out and finding out what are the actual problems first,
Makes sense.
or at the same time, at least.
No, I think pretty much everything has been said. I do think like when we approach the problem from, how can we support more decentralization, you're already framing the answer, right? Because you want to push decentralization, which is a concept that maybe doesn't make sense to a lot of people, or the understanding of the concept doesn't really make sense. When you talk about like, I want to get rich, or I want to get beautiful, or these kind of things, then and that the method, the means to get there is decentralization, you get way more traction approaching the problem this way. So when you promise an APY of 200%, you're going to get a lot of people who are going to get through the hell of the KYC and deal with all that shit, like, for like ages and ages, because the promise is like, I'm going to get rich, so I'm willing to get through a really bad UX and a poorly relevant product because the promise is there. So I think as technologists and designers, like, if we shift a little bit the language and the way we approach the problem from purely how can we push the technology down people's throats, from what's the problem we're trying to solve, or what kind of like new kind of society we're trying to promote as well, like more free and more free speech and these kind of things, it gets more traction automatically, and you speak the language of people, and you get more understood.
Leggy, I wanted you to come up and talk a little bit about different areas in the tech stack that you think require a little bit more attention as far as decentralization, etc. If you want to get up there, I think you'd be a good fit for that. There's another mic.
Missing a bit context now because it was at the registration, but yeah, for example, Khan also like showed before, like the Sourcify, for example, a lot of centralization creeped in with like Etherscan, for example, like verified contracts on Etherscan, so it centralizes around there, and it's basically creeping in everywhere again because it's easy, Like decentralization is hard, and centralization is much easier, so it creeps in again, and we have to fight it. And for example, with Sourcify, decentralized smart contract verification, that's one point. I don't know what was talked before.
But I wanted to get, basically the topic is like decentralization. Why is it important? It's kind of being put at the back burner in most of the conversations that are happening because we're looking for user onboarding, we're looking for adoption, etc. Yeah. Decentralization and like the fact the core properties of Web3 sometimes get kind of pushed under the rug because now we're trying to cater to everyone.
Because it's easier to onboard with a centralized system than with a decentralized one.
For sure.
But it's really important that we get to the core values of decentralization because we need to be resilient. Because resiliency is like the most important thing for decentralization. Because like if you're centralized, if Etherscan shuts down, we have a big problem. So, but now like with, for example, like the smart contract verification there, like we still have it on IPFS, and or like run nodes our own. Like don't trust like Infura with our nodes because Infura might go down. Yeah. And I think a storm will come. Like governments at some point will say, oh, we don't like that. So, and it's easy to just shut Etherscan down. Also, like, don't use the cloud for our stuff, right? Like, run our nodes in the cloud. So it's not just important that it's our nodes, it's also important that it's our infrastructure. You know what I mean? Because cloud providers just might say, oh, you run your like staking nodes there? That's kind of you switch them off, and then we have a problem. So.
Yeah, like, I think the really difficult thing in the Web3 space is we are fighting problems that are really hidden until the day comes. Like, until, I don't know, infra shuts down, until your money gets seized by a government, you don't care about that, and it's not really there for you. And it's really difficult to show the users that this problem exists, and it can come to you at some point. And yeah, I mean, I don't know how we get around this, but it's the inherent big issue we have in this space, I think.
I think it's sort of also relying on the fact that we can't just be shouting this out of a megaphone at people. What I've noticed through my research recently is more and more crypto becoming like a family affair because people trust people, right? So if we can like get somebody, they go wrong on the course. First they buy some crypto on Coinbase, and then they want to buy shitcoin, and then they go down this route into Web3, and now they're discovering all these things, and now they're learning about decentralization. And then they become like a node, which is a point, like a communicator to somebody else within their network that this is something that's valuable and that they should look into as well. I think that we're going to see a lot more of that, like a bit more like actual like human network effects, rather than it was a bit of us just shouting at people before, and I don't think that's very effective. But it's a bit like it's that sneaking decentralization in right at the end, and then they go, oh wow, oh my god, that's really cool. Like, and wouldn't it be amazing if, you know, even just 10% of all people who had a wallet, whatever a wallet means, was running a node, you know, for the services that they use, and then like having communities of, you know, people running nodes, like thinking about that from a like location specific place, not just like online communities, like people in specific locations as well. I think that if we can show, like, it also has to be easy for somebody to do that as well, and not scary, and understanding what value they're bringing. It's kind of like an altruistic thing that you can do for the rest of the community.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So one thing I want to say is I think there's the hardware cost is really important. Like there was these whole efforts to do the $10 computer or the $100 laptop. And I think we need projects that are doing like a $50 node. Because like imagine a future where like 10 village women can come together, take a microloan, and they can run a node in their village from a solar panel. I think that's an amazing future. Like, because people are entrepreneurial all around the world. Like, and running nodes is like financially beneficial. And so like the biggest challenge is like, yeah, like I can't go buy like 10 NVIDIA cards and like run a node. Like you can't even find 10 NVIDIA cards right now. Like, so like.
The merge is coming soon.
Yeah, but like that.
Trademark.
that I think cost of the hardware and availability, like people, like even accessing Raspberry Pis in Pakistan is hard, right? Like how do we get, so if like Ethereum Foundation wants to do a project, like how would you get like 100,000 people in Pakistan access to the hardware to even run the node? And that's, I think, the supply chain challenges are just as real, even though we want to exist in the digital reality.
So not even the hardware, the infrastructure.
The
for
infrastructure,
like
yeah.
Electricity goes out every day, like the generator.
Resilience for power outages needs to be there, that like your node can't reset like between those power outages. And those realities, I think, need to be taken care of, because we're talking about geographies where like people don't even have fridges, and these are very hot climates, so you can't like, it's not like you can run your node in Greenland. So like, how do we, and yeah, climate change will happen, so like how do we make our hardware resilient for those kind of geographies which are so population dense?
Makes sense, but like even when we were talking about the gaming use case, et cetera, like 9 validators is not decentralized, et cetera. So I think like having context to like what true decentralization means, and then like how can we optimize for that is probably key. We are running on time. There was another topic around post-merge Ethereum or L2 stuff, et cetera. I think we'll probably cut that short and create the opportunity for people to present and create some call to actions for potential working groups that we'll be forming in the afternoon. So I'd like to thank everyone that volunteered to come on stage and really had a wonderful conversation, and really appreciate it.